I didn't think you'd be able to see my shirt on Zoom, but you can. So what I'm going to talk about are, I have to get my right and left situated when I'm on the screen. These are blue-footed boobies.
Oh, there you go.
So anyway, I don't recall the first time I ever heard about blue-footed boobies. It wasn't all that long ago. Birds that are native to the Galapagos Islands, which we visited 2 weeks ago. And they have these amazingly blue feet, the color of the sky. And believe it or not, there are also red-footed boobies whose feet are the color of a bright red balloon, and green-footed boobies whose their feet are a little dull. They're not quite as spectacular as the other two. The islands also have a contingent of frigate birds. Did anybody ever hear of frigate birds? So they follow ships to shore because the ships kind of rustle up the fish and then they'll dive for the fish. So anyway, they are comparatively small birds with a huge wingspan. And the males have this red pouch in the front that kind of blow up to attract the females. And according to the size of this thing on their chest, they are labeled as either grand or magnificent. So you can see how really, truly wonderful they are. We also saw pelicans, even owls. Who would expect to see owls at the seashore? Finches that spawned a study that proved the rapidity of evolution, bright red crabs, giant tortoises, and very friendly sea lions, who my youngest granddaughter called sea puppies because they were so very friendly. So all of these animals live in a wildlife paradise. No one hunts them, so they're not afraid. And the birds will lay their eggs right in the middle of the path where people walk by all the time and sit on their nest or sit on their babies, and they are not at all afraid. These islands are wild, barren, and beautiful, with all sizes and shapes of prickly pears, which is a variety of cactus. There's red soil and there's black volcanic rock. The black volcanic rock is all over the place, and sand, of course, and the crystal clearest, cleanest seawater I have ever seen in my whole life. And from a distance, the sea is the same color, the same turquoise as the Caribbean. So this idyllic place almost wasn't. Greedy human beings did their best to destroy the Galapagos. They hunted the giant tortoises, the whales, and the fur seals almost to extinction. Pirates, colonists, sailors, and adventurers introduced rats, cattle, goats, cats, and dogs that almost destroyed the bird and the iguana populations. And it was not until the 1950s, through the efforts of scientists and the Ecuadorian government, that the Galapagos became a national park and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So the islands also, most of the islands lack water. So that lack of water and the UNESCO designation continues to protect the islands, continues to protect the ocean and the animals from development and the encroachment of human beings and all that comes along with that. No huge cruise ships visit the islands, and all of the ship's captains and crew must be Ecuadorian. So visitors are limited. And in our many outings, I think on one island, we saw maybe 30 people. And on another island, we saw, I don't know, maybe 20. So there's no jostling for views. You know, maybe the sea lions would jostle you, but not the people. So when we returned home, and in between doing the laundry and cleaning the house, I read an article in the Atlantic about Arizona. So Arizona, like the Galapagos, has little water and is dry and uninviting. But that didn't stop folks from settling there. Bands of ancient Native Americans called the Hohokam lived in the Sonoran Desert and built hundreds of miles of canals that irrigated crops for 1,000 years until disease, war, drought, or any combination caused them to either leave or die off. The Mormons who settled this land in the 1890s rebuilt those dams. As more and more people moved in, the frugal Mormons began to worry about long-term sustainability. Rusty Bowers, you remember Rusty Bowers of the 2020 election fame? He remembered his mother telling him that a Mormon elder said in the 1920s that he foresaw lines of people leaving the area because there was no water left. So 5 million people now live in that desert, an area, the Sonoran Desert, an area that can maybe sustain a couple thousand or several thousand. Although the desert is one of the hottest places in the US, it is also one of the fastest growing areas in the country. Phoenix, where temperatures regularly hit 110 degrees in the summer, has now surpassed the mostly temperate, currently water sufficient Philadelphia as the 5th largest city in the nation. Those who tried to regulate the water in Phoenix in the 1980s have been replaced by folks who have pushed development far, far out into the desert just because they can. And in the unregulated hinterland, mega businesses have pumped out enormous quantities of groundwater, causing citizens' wells to run dry. In addition, a drought of biblical proportions has hit the area, compounding the excessive heat. Unlike the Galapagos, wiser heads have not prevailed. So we know that wisdom is a gift of the Spirit, who dispenses it freely to all those who choose to listen. We accept or reject this gift at our own peril and the peril of those around us. We should know, however, that the wisdom of God does not usually look like the wisdom of human beings. Has anybody else had that experience? The divine might not even come to us in human words, or we might filter the Holy One through our own desires, biases, and expectations. And so God, unfortunately, often gets lost in the translation. A serious mistranslation occurred at the very beginning of Christianity, when the hardworking Abba God of Jesus and the Jewish people, who struggled right along the people of God, was safely shut up and re-explained by Greek philosophy. The Hebrew adjectives used to describe God were translated by the Greeks into words that meant clean and pure, and thus began the church's fixation on sexual purity, something that Jesus would never understand. And sometimes the result of a mistranslation, or maybe a true translation, can be comical. Anybody ever read Elizabeth Gilbert's book, Eat, Love, and Pray? Yeah. Do you remember the scene where she's crying hysterically on the bathroom floor in the middle of the night, asking God what she should do next? Anybody remember the words that she heard? She heard a voice say, "Get up and go to bed." Which is surprisingly unexpected, but very good advice from the Holy One. But what if we are waiting for God's answer to our prayers to appear in human words and familiar images, and it is coming in a completely different language, like the language of bumblebees or flowers or sun rays? What if the voice of our Creator is coming in the sound of the Colorado River, giving up its life-giving water as it fades away to a trickle? What if the voice of God howls in the whirlwind of an unusual Category 4 hurricane in June? What if the voice of God are the gasps of thirsty people begging for water during a long and intractable drought? What is God trying to speak through the thick and heavy air of 100-degree summer days, where outdoor activity is so dangerous that homeless people who fall sustain second-degree burns? What is God telling us as the once mighty Hoover Dam is now at the lowest level where it can produce electricity? Can we hear the voice of the Divine One in the sound of melting glaciers and the dying gasps of creatures on heat-scorched coral reefs? So I don't know about you, but it's easy to be quite depressed about climate change when so many folks seem to think that human beings can plunder the earth without consequence or conscience. 19th century naturalists must have felt this way when the captains of commerce had their crews kill just about every single fur seal in the Galapagos so they could supply rich people in Europe with fur hats. But there is good news. It's always good news. And the good news is that our readings today tell us about the prophets, the movers and the shakers, and the ordinary people who try to change things in the face of naysayers, the lazy, the greedy, and the blind guides who think they have the market on God and on everything else for that matter. Yesterday, I love reading New York Times obituaries. Does anybody else read them? They are like the best part of the newspaper. So I read the obituary. I'm strange, but I've met so many unusual people that I never heard of. I'm reading their obituary. So I read the obituary of V. Craig Johnson, the scientist who discovered the drug tamoxifen, which cures many forms of breast cancer and has saved the lives of many women. So his hard work actually revolutionized the treatment of breast cancer. And he called his painstaking work with the effects of drugs on human beings, he called that conversations with nature. And so I think that we all sort of need to have a sit down with God and try to learn the divine language that God speaks if we are to leave a decent world for our children and our grandchildren.